Hello and welcome to I Know Dino. Keep up with the latest dinosaur discoveries and science with us. I'm Garrett.
And I'm Sabrina.
And today in our 517th episode...
This episode's all about answering listener questions. They range from, did non-avian dinosaurs live past the KPG in what's now New Zealand? Or how to survive the Mesozoic? Or would you go to a real-life Jurassic Park? Also, what dinosaurs would win Best in Show? Plus, we've got 2 dinosaur books that are great references that we want to talk about. Then there's Dinosaur of the Day, Albertadromeus. There you go, Garrett. Alberta, not Alberto.
Nice.
It's another contender for Best Pet Dinosaur, or maybe for Best Meal in the Mesozoic. Spoilers.
Best meal?
And then our fun fact is that New Zealand isn't the only area where scientists once considered non-avian dinosaurs to have maybe survived past the KPG. I went down an Oryctodromeus burrow on this one.
Sort of lost worlds?
Not exactly. More like they just happened to survive longer than the Cretaceous.
Okay, like a little bit longer.
Maybe. But I'm going to say that take that with a big old grain of salt.
Okay.
And we'll get into why.
But before we get into all of that, as always, we'd like to thank some of our patrons. This week we have 10 patrons to thank, and they are the Georges family. It's Devin Baby, Philip, Ryan, Fog Knight, Katie, Rhinosaurus, Cerosaurus Rex, Styjacosaurus, and John. Thank you all very much for joining our Patreon. And I just want to point out that you can submit questions to us even if you aren't a patron at bit.ly/dinoquestions. But if you are a patron, you can ask us questions and we will respond much more quickly because you'll get access to our Discord server and you can just @Dino Garrett or @Sabrinasaurus, I think is your handle on there.
Sure is.
And it'll pop up on our devices and then we can just answer you right there. Or you can get a more conversational discussion going with other people in our community too, which is always fun when people pose these outlandish questions. It happens periodically because people will come up with something and be like, wait, what was going on with that thing? And then kicks off a whole interesting discussion. Sometimes we bring it into our show too.
Yes. Could be an outlandish question or could be not an outlandish question.
Could be a very landish question.
Yes.
Inlandish.
So yeah, if you want to join our Patreon, that's patreon.com/iknowdino. Speaking of Patreon, that's actually our first listener question that we're going to answer in this episode. This one is from Richard, who is a patron, and recently wrote to us asking what's going on with those New Zealand dino fossils that might be a remnant of survivors past the extinction event, which this really got me down an Oryctodromeus burrow. And it was a lot of fun to read. It was a lot more sources than I was expecting.
Talking about things like moas?
No, we're talking about non-avian dinosaurs here. So I did find one paper that mentioned non-avian dinosaur fossils found in New Zealand in an area that had fossils from the Late Cretaceous mixed in with Paleocene fossils. And the Paleocene, for reference, was between 66 to 56 million years ago.
Okay.
So the one right after. This paper was published in 2006 by Jeffrey Stillwell and others. The others included Thomas Rich, Patricia Vickers-Rich, and Phil Curry. Those names might sound familiar, especially Thomas and Patricia Vickers-Rich. They're some of the best known paleontologists in Australia.
Yeah, and we've interviewed them as well as Phil Curry on the show before.
Yes. And then, of course, Phil Curry is...
In Canada.
And a very big name in paleontology. This was published in Paleogeography, Paleoclimatology, and Paleoecology. So this has to do with the Chatham Islands of New Zealand. They're a chain of islands about 500 miles or 800 kilometers east of New Zealand's South Island, and they're part of New Zealand. There's evidence of a land bridge that connected those islands to New Zealand, and it had a lot of floodplains and deltas and forests with conifers and club moss, and it was temperate to warm. According to the paper, they wrote, the island's, quote, region would have, along with New Zealand, provided a dinosaur island sanctuary after separating from the Gondwana margin about 80 million years ago. So that's nice, a dinosaur island sanctuary. I guess that's kind of like your lost world.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly what I was thinking. Although I was thinking it would have just been all of New Zealand as a lost world, not a small island separating from New Zealand as a lost world. And then I guess 80 million years is obviously long before the end of the Cretaceous.
Yes, it's There were many dinosaurs still around 80 million years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But these fossils were found in the Takatika Grit. That's a geologic formation that has fossils from the Paleocene. And again, the Paleocene was between 66 to 56 million years ago.
Specifically after the end Cretaceous extinction, when all the non-avian dinosaurs were supposed to be gone.
Yes. What makes things fuzzy is there's also some late Cretaceous sediments and fossils there. So the dinosaur fossils found include parts of a theropod in marine sediments. It's parts of the feet and legs and hands. They're not necessarily all from the same individual. Based on one of the bones found, specifically the partial centrum, that particular theropod was medium in size, about 4 meters long and 3 meters high, or 13 feet long and almost 10 feet high. And part of the hand that was found is small, but not very curved, and it has grooves that make it most likely from a theropod, and it looks similar to ornithomimosaurs. Again, these are not from the same individual.
Okay, I can see. I was trying to figure out why it would be almost as tall as it is long, but then when you say ornithomimosaur, that makes more sense because that's sort of an ostrich body plan with a little tail on it.
Well, we don't have enough fossils or details to know exactly which dinosaurs the fossils belong to.
So those size estimates are very rough approximations.
And all we can say for sure is it's theropod bones. Again, not from the same individual. So maybe it's different theropods too. But some other fossils found include dinoflagellates, which are mostly marine plankton, and those correlate to the late Cretaceous and early Paleocene in time.
We've had some dinoflagellates.
We have much more recent ones.
Yeah, modern, extant dinoflagellates.
Yes. Well, they said the grit may represent an accumulation of late Cretaceous sediments and fossils deposited after the KPG boundary in the Danian. That's about 66 to 61.6 million years ago. But some microfossils on the site show that the KPG boundary may be below the exposed bone-rich beds. So the thinking is that the theropod fragments were transported into the shallow marine environment from nearby terrestrial habitats, the land. Although, interestingly, the paper said the bones had no signs of reworking, which means there's no signs that it was necessarily moved.
Just because there's no signs of reworking doesn't mean they weren't reworked.
Right. And then a 2017 study of the age of the Takatika Grit found it to be Paleocene in age, but with disturbed and reworked late Cretaceous fossils. And that study said that there was no, quote, intact Cretaceous-Paleogene boundary transition, end quote, at this locality. So it does sound like the dinosaur fossils got mixed in with the younger marine fossils. And there's no direct evidence here of non-avian dinosaurs living past the KPG, past that extinction event.
Interesting. Yeah, I liked that description of, well, they were in marine sediment, and maybe they were fossils that were on the land, in the rock, and then they eroded out of the rock, basically, fell into the ocean, and then got reburied and not refossilized. They were already fossilized.
They got transported.
Yeah.
Which reminds me of, we talk about it in the upcoming I Know Paleo Mass Extinction Saga, some ghost fossils that hadn't been seen for millions and millions of years, but then things eroded so much that they came out again and ended up with a later mass extinction. But we'll save that for another time. Now, back to New Zealand. Dinosaurs have been found in New Zealand. They're mostly from the Maastrichtian in the late Cretaceous, though, mostly in the Tahora Formation in northeastern New Zealand. None of them have been named, but there's fossils found from ankylosaurs, ornithopods, titanosaurs, and theropods. There's one theropod known as Joan Whiffin's theropod, which is also known as Mangahuanga, named after the stream of the same name, and that one's estimated to be up to 11 feet or 3.5 meters long.
I didn't realize there were so many finds in northeastern New Zealand.
I think they're fragmentary.
Yeah, it sounds like it if none of them have been named.
Yeah. But, like you were saying earlier, Garrett, there are some very old birds.
Yes, and large birds.
Large bird dinosaurs that have been found in New Zealand, and some of them are from the Paleocene. One is Waimanu, which lived around 62 to 60 million years ago. That genus name means water bird. It's about the size of an emperor penguin. It probably didn't fly, but it could dive. However, its wing bones didn't have the same specializations as modern penguins, and it may have had a body shape like a flightless loon.
Oh, weird.
Well, it's an early early penguin type bird.
Yeah, when you said it was the size of an emperor penguin, I was thinking like Hesperornis, which is very penguin-like.
Mm-hmm.
But then to hear that it's more loon-like, it just seems like a strange combination.
Yes. Well, it's a water bird. There's also the seabird Protodontopteryx, which is a bony tooth bird, well, a pseudo-tooth bird, that lived in the early Paleocene about 62 million years ago. That genus name means first Odontopteryx. Odontopteryx was one of the earlier names for this clade. The pelagornithids, or pseudo-teeth birds, they had tooth-like projections on their beaks.
Yeah, so basically that keratin beak, Rhamphotheca, has a bunch of pointy spikes on it that aren't actually teeth, because teeth need to be made out of something more bone-like with dentin and all that, with enamel.
Mm-hmm.
But they look like teeth and they function like teeth, because a lot of times these birds are like grabbing up fish and things with their beaks. And if their beaks have spiky projections on them, they're basically teeth, pseudo-teeth.
Exactly. So Protodontopteryx is smaller than its relatives. It's about the size of a gull, with an estimated wingspan of 3.3 feet, or about a meter. And it had stout arm bones, but that made it less specialized for soaring for long periods of time. But again, it's an early one. So there we go. There are some of the dinosaurs that lived after the KPG in New Zealand. But this kind of reminded me about a couple of books published by Princeton University Press. They don't directly answer the question of which, if any, of the dinosaurs survived the KPG, but they do talk a lot about dinosaurs and fossils, and they're great reference books. They're both by Gregory S. Paul. You got the Princeton Field Guide to Dinosaurs, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard of. It's a very popular one, and it's been going for many years.
Yeah, we're on a few generations in at this point.
Exactly. It's a great overview of dinosaur research and discovery, and also defining what a dinosaur is, and you've got a lot of great illustrations. It goes through the history and evolution of dinosaurs, and what they looked like, and their posture, and how their bones fit together. I really like the skeletals.
The skeletals are very good. Some of the illustrations are not as high quality as the skeletals, but the skeletals are super good.
Yeah, and there's a lot of great information. It can get pretty dense, but I think it's a good starting, or maybe medium starting point into the world of dinosaurs.
It's a little encyclopedic, I would say.
Yes, yes.
There are a couple of oddball Gregory Paul hypotheses in the mix too. So if you read something and you're like, wait, why is this one split out into a different genus? Or why is this one lumped together? Some of those are his more fringe ideas, I would say, but nothing really too far out there.
No, there's a section about how they reproduced, and it says, quote, "It's possible that some dinosaurs produced a milk-like substance in the digestive tract that was regurgitated to their young, as pigeons do, but there's no direct evidence of this."
Basically, anything birds do is possible that dinosaurs did.
Yes. And there's an index at the end for all of the dinosaurs named and all their formations, so you can get a lot of information from this book. He's also got the Princeton Field Guide to Predatory Dinosaurs, if you want to get even more specific about your dinosaurs. It's like some 300 species, talks about their history, anatomy, how they moved, reproduced, grew, how they went extinct. And there's a lot of color and black and white drawings and figures, as well as some really nice detailed color maps. So you get an explanation of what makes a predatory dinosaur a predatory dinosaur.
Basically a theropod.
Yes.
At least once you get past the Triassic.
Right, right. And then it's like, just like the other one, it's like an encyclopedia, but just the predators, starting with dinosauriforms, and then getting into the famous ones like tyrannosaurs, of course.
One thing that is pretty useful about the Princeton Field Guide books and Gregory Paul's books in general is he's not afraid to put his nickel down on size estimates of dinosaurs. And when we interviewed him months ago, maybe even over a year ago at this point, he mentioned that he thinks that's part of the reason that he gets cited so often is because he'll give a length estimate where most other people won't. And in some cases, you just have this really small bone, so it's hard to give a real accurate length estimate. But it is nice for science communication to have a number.
Yes.
Because even if you only have a little piece of a jaw and you can't really tell if it's 20 or 30 feet long, if you're going to just say, well, it's in the rough ballpark of 25 feet long, it can be useful when you're trying to figure out, well, is it 5 feet long? Is it 40 feet long? It's nice to give a rough estimate in some of these cases.
Yes, and we've cited him many times on our show.
I think partly because he does so many of these size estimates.
He does, and after getting to know him a little bit better, it's clear he puts in a lot of research to make it as accurate as possible.
Yes. He does have a very specific view of what accurate is, but he definitely works really hard at these books.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like he's just throwing something together.
Yes. So we'll get back to our listener questions in just a moment, but first we're going to take a quick break for our sponsors. All right, getting back to our questions. Next, we have a question from Paul. And as a reminder, Garrett, you already mentioned, but you can ask us questions and send us feedback at bit.ly/dinoquestions.
And that's how Paul sent his message.
We will be checking while we're out on our soon-to-be parental leave, but don't worry, we'll be answering more questions when we get back. So Paul had 2 questions that are kind of related. The first one is, if you could be part of a group that took a one-way trip back in time 65 million years ago, would you do it?
No.
Let me finish the question. Assume you are given a shipping container full of supplies to take along with you. Presumably, the Cretaceous Paleogene extinction event would take care of any pesky time paradoxes that might crop up as a result of the trip.
Still no. I mean, if you were going, if you had your heart set on going, I might go. Just, because I don't want to be without you. But other than that, very specific reason.
Right. Well, that's really nice. My answer is also no.
Okay, good. Then I don't have to worry about that.
You don't have to. It reminds me of this book I read years ago called Cretaceous Dawn. And in the book, an experiment goes wrong, and there's a group of people hurled back in time to the dinosaurs, and another team has to rescue them, which I recommend reading that book. It was a fun read. And what's cool about it is it talks about what life might be like for modern humans that get abruptly transported to the Cretaceous, and then how they deal with the dinosaurs and how they figure out how to survive, not just the predators, but also things like the weather.
It's so hot. I don't do well in heat, so that alone would make it not ideal. I guess I could go closer to the poles.
Well, it might not be easy for you to get to the poles.
Very true. You got to walk.
Yes. So again, at this point, my answer would be no, even though it would be really cool because, well, I've got you, Garrett, but we also have our toddler and a baby on the way, and I wouldn't be able to leave them.
Raising a family, even if we could bring them with us, like, oh boy.
Yeah.
Those are treacherous conditions.
And I don't have the best wilderness skills.
Even if you do, like just keeping a toddler from running off and getting eaten sounds impossible.
Yes. So maybe if this was a return trip instead of one way, but from reading books like Cretaceous Dawn, even that sounds risky.
Yeah. And like food wise, like even if you have a shipping container full of supplies, I don't know how much food you can fit in a shipping container. It's probably not many generations worth of food.
You still have to figure out how you're going to survive long term.
Yeah, you got to eat something. I guess we could go back to our Homo erectus or early Homo sapien ancestors who were probably hypercarnivorous and just eat like nothing but fish and other meat. But that sounds not that great.
Well, the other thing I was thinking is maybe once I'm much older and if I feel like I've done everything I need to do in the modern world, maybe I'd want to take
go
that
back
trip.
And get eaten.
Well,
because you're not going to be outrunning anything if you're really old.
That's true. Go out with a bang. You can see the dinosaurs. I'm going to read Paul's answer to the question, which is yes.
Oh.
He wrote, seeing real dinosaurs in their natural habitat would be a dream come true for me. I have a great life here in 2024, but my overwhelming natural curiosity would eventually win me over. I've been looking at dinosaur books, going to museums, and listening to great dinosaur podcasts my whole life. Oh, thanks, Paul. But always in the back of my mind, I know that we really don't have the 100% correct picture. Only good but constantly evolving guesses. If I was able to travel back to their time, I'd learn so much more than we do now, and it would be the right answer. I'm sure my friends and family, I'm not married, no kids, would understand and be happy for me. Plus, it would be one heck of a trip. So there we go.
I mean, that's very nice. I'm impressed. It would be cool. One of the things I think of with time travel events like this is how you convey a message from that far back in time to the present. And there are ways now, like there's some new research into how you can store information on quartz, for example, which is supposed to last like billions or trillions of years, basically, because quartz is such a stable mineral. And so if Paul brought that back with him, he could document, like the color, or maybe even have like a digital camera, like take pictures and then like put that onto the quartz.
Yeah.
So then we would have like really precise knowledge about these dinosaurs. Although, even if you did that, you're only getting one ecosystem of dinosaurs.
True.
So say you went to the end Cretaceous, you'd find out what T-Rex, Ankylosaurus, Pachycephalosaurus, Triceratops all looked like. You might even be able to settle the debate of Triceratops, Torosaurus, Nanotyrannus versus Tyrannosaurus, which would be really cool and interesting. But you wouldn't have any idea about Spinosaurus.
Right.
You wouldn't have any idea about these early dinosaurs in the Triassic, or what Dilophosaurus looked like with those head crests. All sorts of other interesting mysteries you wouldn't really know.
Maybe you could somehow get your shipping container to move around the world.
But you'd also have to move in time multiple times.
Oh, that's true. I'd be interested in knowing about dinosaurs in the mountains.
Yeah, that's true. It'd be funny if there just weren't any. It's just like nothing going on up there except for like small mammals or something.
Yeah. That's where they were hiding out the whole time.
Yeah, they're just, they happen to be in the mountains. Yeah, I mean, it would be really cool. I guess I'm just okay with not knowing is what it is. I've come to terms with the fact that we'll never know what dinosaurs look like 100%. And just that constant piecing together a little bit more is exciting to me. Like knowing that we'll never get there, but we're going to get closer and closer and closer in our understanding is fun to me.
I do like seeing how the science and technology progress.
Yeah. It would kind of ruin it a little bit if we knew exactly how every dinosaur looked perfectly 100%. Knew
would it?
Yeah, just because then it's just like any other animal that's around today. It's like alligators aren't nearly as exciting as dinosaurs are. But if all we had was like fossils of alligators with their super wide heads and long bodies and, like half a deer inside their gut contents, we'd be like, what was that animal like?
I do appreciate, though, that there are people like you, Paul, out there who are adventurous enough that you would do it.
It's similar to the question of, would you take a one-way trip to Mars kind of thing? My answer to that is also unequivocally no. But it would be interesting, right? It would be very interesting. I think I'd probably rather go to Mars than go back to the Mesozoic, because theoretically you could make it back from Mars. You could still communicate with people on Earth.
Just like that book.
Yeah. I do love The Martian. Fantastic book.
All right, well, moving on to the second question. If 1993 Jurassic Park was real and functioning as intended, how much would you be willing to pay for a 1-week trip to the park?
And so there's just an assumption that we're definitely going to go. There's no yes or no. No, I'm not going to go option available to us.
Oh, that's a good point. Because my first thought was like, yes, I would go if the park is functioning as intended, as long as that intent isn't to end up like the book or movie.
I see. Yes. He did say functioning as intended, which means the dinosaurs stay in their enclosures, presumably.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know how much I would pay.
Well, I'm going to read Paul's answer first. He says, I'm thinking I'd pay about the same as it costs for a 1-week Disney cruise. It's still a lot of money, but not life-changing money. The difference from the first question is that eventually there would be pictures, videos, etc. from the park that would leak out. My curiosity about their real appearance and behaviors would mostly be satisfied by watching YouTube. A trip to Jurassic Park would still be great, but not something I'd spend my life savings on.
Yeah, definitely agree on not spending life savings. They kind of, again, I keep seeing these connections to space. I know there are people who basically spend their life savings to go up in a rocket to technically be in space for an hour or two, or I don't know, minutes. I can't remember how long you get to be in space when you pay $100,000, $200,000. But I feel like that would be a little bit different because it would be a sensation and it would give you this perspective of Earth that you really can't get from Earth. Whereas I agree with Paul where it's like, if you could see videos of that animal It's like, how much would I spend to go on a safari? You know, I've seen tons of videos of lions and elephants and hippos and everything. So going on a safari would be cool, but I also feel like I kind of already know what they look like and how they act, and I don't feel like I'm missing out on that much. And I think the same would be true with a Jurassic Park type theme park if you could see all the videos and everything of it.
Yeah, it's a good point.
But I would definitely spend a lot more than a Disney cruise.
Oh, really?
I think so. Because I figure if we go on like a big trip once a year, or we used to before we had kids, but if we were going once a year, I think I would be willing to not go on a big trip for like 4 years and spend 5 years worth of trip for one Jurassic Park, maybe even 10.
Yeah.
But I'm not as into traveling as I used to be. So,
Right. I was thinking of paying a similar amount to some sort of Disney related trip,
yeah.
which I know is expensive, and it's gotten more expensive lately.
I would say like low tens of thousands of dollars is what I'd be willing to spend. Because that's also like the cost of a car. Like I'd go without a car for a while. Or drive like an really old, crappy car for a while if it gave me the chance to go see some real dinosaurs in person.
Well, real hybrid with DNA from other animals, but yes.
Oh, that's true. That does kind of ruin it a little bit, that these are like sort of not the actual dinosaurs. If they were the real, genetically exactly identical, and we knew that they were like, this is what T-Rex was like, and this is what Ankylosaurus was like, and you're going to see the actual animal, maybe more of like a time travel type situation than a genetic engineering situation, I'd be more willing to pay a bunch of money for it.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Although, it'd be so cool to see a rearing Brachiosaurus, even if it's a hybrid.
Yeah, I mean, just the scale of these animals, right? It's like there's nowhere else you'd ever see an animal that big on land. You could go see a whale, I guess, but it's hard to get the perspective in the water. And there's sort of, the water isn't clear enough that you can see the whole animal at once a lot of the time and things. But
yeah.
Yeah, that would be super cool. Definitely more. I'd be willing to spend more than I've ever spent on any trip before.
Okay, fair. That's fair. Then we've got a related question. This is from Croasaur via our Discord, which it actually got posted a while back, but I sort of made a note about it. And I thought it'd be a fun one. The question is, you're stuck in the Mesozoic. Which dinosaur would make the best meal? You have a spear, bow, rifle's too easy, so let's say a dozen bullets, and you need to make the most of the animal. Too big, you'll need to dry the meat if you want it to last long.
It's very interesting because my first thought when we were talking about going back to the Mesozoic was going after fish.
Yeah, not dinosaurs.
Not dinosaurs at all. Like I would just be going for fish the whole time because I know how to fish. I mean, I'm not amazing at it, but I'm good enough that I could catch some fish. And I also feel like fish in the Mesozoic would be the easiest pickings ever because they're not going to be used to any sort of human fishing techniques.
True.
Or evolved in that way.
Could also eat bugs.
Yeah, bugs. I'm fine with eating bugs too. And beetles are pretty similar to what they were like back then.
Various plants.
There's probably crickets and things too.
Yeah.
I don't think there are that many plants that we could eat, but maybe you could eat like a heart of a palm or something like that.
Well, depending when you go back to, there might be some angiosperms.
Yeah. With eating a animal, though, eating a dinosaur, pretty universally everybody says you're going to want to eat an herbivore. You're not going to want to eat a predator. So I guess whichever small herbivore is available in the environment that I'm in, that's going to be the one I'm going to go after, because I'm not going to go after like a triceratops because I'm going to get killed. Yes. Unless there's a baby that doesn't happen to have any herd around.
You got to watch out for the parents.
Yeah, maybe. We don't know.
True.
Yeah. I know sometimes it's like Lystrosaurus, right? Isn't that a popular one? Not sure if that's actually a dinosaur, though. That might be a dinosaur morph. It's a dicynodont. So I guess that one doesn't count.
No.
Maybe some sort of like small ceratopsian or nithopod.
Yes, or nithopod. That's what I went with something more specific.
Like Laelinosaura kind of size things.
Well, I went with Albertadromeus, which I kind of said in the beginning. But first, I want to say this question reminded me of another book. Books come up a lot for me.
You've been reading a lot of them.
Well, some of these I read years ago, but The Dechronization of Sam Magruder, a novel by paleontologist George Gaylord Simpson. In that book, Sam Magruder gets thrown back in time, about 80 million years, and the books about how he struggles with surviving, including finding food, being able to preserve it. That's what reminded me. And how he copes with his new reality. And also, interestingly, to tie back to what you said earlier, Garrett, he records his observations on a stone slab in hopes that someone will find it someday. And these are his observations about dinosaurs and early mammals.
Stone slab is a trickier one to get to preserve for such a long period of time.
Well, he had no time to prep.
Yeah. When you were saying Magruder, I kept thinking of that MacGruber movie.
Oh,
And I was like, why does that sound familiar? Oh, it's that like cheesy MacGyver
they're not
knockoff
related
thing.
in any way. So going back to Albertadromeus, I came up with this because I would also look for something small to medium in size, and I ended up searching for smallest herbivores because, well, we know herbivores, they'd be easier to hunt. I think they'd taste better too, and if they're small enough, they're not a danger to me.
Yeah. In general, meat-eating things apparently taste pretty bad.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever eaten anything that eats meat other than fish, predatory fish. But like I've never eaten like a lion or a cat of any sort or any sort of predatory birds.
Yeah, I don't think I have either.
They're not typical things that people eat, right? It's like cows, chickens.
We've tried alligator.
Oh, we did try alligator. That's true. It tasted kind of like ostrich.
I thought it tasted kind of like chicken.
Well, chicken, ostrich tastes kind
Yeah,
of like chicken too.
That's true.
But it was really processed, right? It was like an ingredient in like ravioli or something when we had it.
Or maybe a burger, I can't remember. Or a nugget.
Maybe.
It was a long time ago.
I remember it was pasta.
Oh. But you know what? I might have had alligator more than once.
It's true. It might also be different what reptilian predators taste like versus what mammalian predators taste like.
Mm-hmm.
And then the question is, where are dinosaurs on that spectrum? Are they more like a bird or are they more like other reptiles?
Something only Paul can tell us if he travels back in time.
That's true. And he manages to carve it on stone or
in quartz.
Store it in quartz somehow.
Yep. So yeah, I came up with Albertadromeus. That's the smallest known herbivore found in Canada. It's an ornithopod. It lived in the Late Cretaceous in what's now Alberta. It was about 5 feet or 1.6 meters long and weighed 30 pounds or 16 kilograms, which is similar in weight to a large turkey.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. That's turkey.
Yeah. So I guess I'm going for the turkey dinosaurs. I'd have to be clever about trapping it, though, because based on its legs, it was a fast runner. So you can't just chase it. And when it was first named, the press release about it said, quote, "You can imagine such small dinosaurs filling the niche of animals such as rabbits and being major but relatively inconspicuous members of their ecological community." So that sounds pretty good to me.
True. You like rabbit?
Well, I like that in this case, there'd be so many Albertadromeus individuals running around. Wouldn't be a problem if I ate a few.
Oh, I see. You're not going to decimate the ecosystem, knocking out a really important linchpin.
Yeah. All the other dinosaurs are eating it too.
Everybody's doing it.
All right. Last but not least, we have a question from Sue via our Patreon, who said, "The National Dog Show inspired this question. Just like the dog show has 7 categories based on traits and picks the best dog for each category, which dinosaur do you think would be best in show for each of the dinosaur classifications? Theropods, sauropods, stegosaurs, ankylosaurs, ornithopods, ceratopsians, and pachycephalosaurs."
I like that theropods and sauropods just get one category, and then the ornithischians get the other 5.
I was thinking, yeah, in theory, you could narrow this down to 3.
Yeah.
Because usually dinosaurs get divided into theropods, sauropods, ornithischians.
Mm-hmm. But ornithischians are much more varied
Yes.
than theropods and sauropods, so I could see why you do it this way.
I also like the idea of keeping it the same with 7 categories. Ornithischians, I'm going to get into the 7 groups of the National Dog Show real quick, but ornithischians are kind of like the non-sporting group one, where they're all the dinosaurs that are left and they come in all sorts of shapes and sizes.
That's funny. Yeah, I was thinking, I clearly forgot how dog shows work, that it was going to be by category of feature,
Mhm.
like best tail, best, head, best neck, best legs, but that's not at all how dog shows work.
No. So the 7 groups of the National Dog Show, according to their website, in the descriptions, which I'm paraphrasing here, you've got the terrier group. These dogs are known to be determined, have courage and self-confidence. There's the toy group, which are companions to humans and ideal for city dwellers because they're small. There's the working group, that are powerfully built and intelligent. They're often guard dogs and service dogs.
Those are my faves.
You have to have a lot of space for them, though.
Yeah.
There's the sporting group, which help with game birds or waterfowl.
You need a lot of space for those too.
Oh, yes. Also the hound group. They hunt somewhat independently for their humans and they track by scent. The herding group, which gather and move livestock. A lot of these dogs require a lot of space. And then the non-sporting group, all the breeds that are left. So again, that means lots of sizes, shapes, hair function, and history.
I think the herding group is actually the most difficult one to have just like in your house. I've heard of them like trying to herd kids into the corner of the room, things like that, like nipping at heels. But they can also be very sweet, and they're the most intelligent, I think, the herding group. So,
yeah, they've all got the characteristics that make them lovable.
I mean, they were all literally bred by people to have characteristics that are useful to us. So it's not surprising that there's a niche for each of them.
So in terms of the 7 categories for the dinosaurs, I'm just going to come up with some brief descriptions here. For the theropod group, let's say they're generally carnivorous, and some could get quite large. For the sauropod group, they're known for being some of the largest animals to ever live on land, and of course having the long necks and tails. The stegosaur group are herbivores known for the plates and spines on their backs, and the spikes or thagomizers on their tails. I can't really attribute any behavioral characteristics to these groups. So we're just going with what they look like. There's the ankylosaur group, which is closely related to stegosaurs and known for being covered in armor, and many of them had club tails. The ornithopod group, one of the most successful herbivorous groups. They ranged in size. They could walk on 2 legs or all 4s. Some were so large they had to be on all 4s, and many of them also had dental batteries. The ceratopsian group, herbivorous dinosaurs with beaks, although many of them also had horns and frills. And the pachycephalosaur group, dinosaurs with thick skulls that were either domed, flat, or wedge-shaped. So I was thinking about, like, what would you look for in each category? And I know I would have some bias. I think if we were to do this every year, I might have themes, like what's the best small one, or the best preserved fossil, or the most fierce. There's just some examples that come to mind for each of the categories.
Yeah, that's true. I also think that in all of these categories, when you have dog shows, it's not just like, oh, I like that breed the best. It's like, oh, that's a really good representation of that group. Like everything about it, its behavior is on point, which isn't super relevant here. But I think it would be more like you're talking about best preserved fossil. That would probably be the standout feature, because it's not really supposed to be like something that's intrinsic to the species or to the breed. It's supposed to be like, you're a great example of your specific group.
Oh, that's a good point. Well, I might have to rethink some of my answers then.
Well, you could do it either way, though.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking for the theropod group, kind of have to go with T-Rex. Because it had the lethal banana teeth that could crush bone.
Yeah, and there are some good preserved T-Rex skulls and things like that. I think if I was doing theropods, I'd go with either Archaeopteryx lithographica, just like, so like that's
very well preserved.
One of the most tattooed dinosaur fossils by far is the Archaeopteryx. Like we're talking about the actual individual at this point, not just a generic, because I think T-Rex is probably the most.
Right.
But if you're talking about like the fossil itself, probably Archaeopteryx, the Berlin specimen. I also really like the fighting dinosaurs. So that has a velociraptor in it, as well as a ceratopsian.
Right. The most active one found.
Yeah. It's just really well. It has such a cool story to it that it's literally 2 dinosaurs fossilized fighting is amazing.
Well, for the sauropod group, I'm very biased here. I'd have to say Brontosaurus. I like its name, Thunder Lizard, but we see it also in movies and lots of media. Yay, Littlefoot. Although in terms of specific specimens, I don't know. Those aren't great.
Yeah, I don't know. Sauropod. Maybe Patagotitan? I think that's probably what I would go with.
'Cause it's so large.
And it's pretty complete. Like we have a very good understanding of its size because there are multiple individuals that were combined together, which I guess is sort of breaking the rule. But one of them was pretty complete. Yeah, Brontosaurus is pretty important too. So you could go with something like that. I don't know what other sauropods I'm not as much of a sauropod person, so I don't know which specimen I would go with. I think there's some Lufungosaurus, sauropodomorphs,
Oh, yeah.
that are pretty well preserved.
That's
They're
true.
fairly complete. Maybe something like that.
We're really not narrowing it down.
Yeah. I'm going with Patagotitan. That's
Okay.
the one I would pick.
All right. I got Brontosaurus. For the Stegosaur group, I was tempted to go with Stegosaurus, but there are so many Stegosaurs with cool spines and plates. And one that came to mind was Gigantspinosaurus, which had these really large shoulder spines that were twice the length of its shoulder blades. And they've also found skin impressions of this one.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a cool one. I don't know enough about Stegosaurus to pick one that's remarkably well preserved. I feel, there is a Stegosaurus individual, I don't know which specimen number it is, that has all the neck scales preserved.
Yeah, those are cool.
It's sort of like neck armor, but it's like all underneath its neck. I think that would be my go-to. That's a really cool one.
I'll let you go first for the Ankylosaur group.
So for the best preserved individual, by far, it's got to be, I would have to say, Borealopelta, because it's got like a face, it's got gut contents, it's got preserved keratin on its armor, and it's just amazingly well preserved. Zool is also super cool. It's preserved in a very different way, sort of pancaked out, but also has all of its armor in position. And that one has a club tail, so I like it a little bit better in that way.
Yeah.
But Borealopelta is literally my background in my profile picture on some websites because I love it so much that I want my picture with it. That's how pretty I think it is. Like, I can't, in terms of just dinosaurs in general, that's one of the prettiest and most well-preserved specimens anywhere ever. So Borealopelta's got to be up there.
I was going to go with Ankylosaurus because of our bias, and that's your favorite.
Yes. I mean, in terms of dinosaur coolness, Ankylosaurus is the best one because it's by far the biggest.
Yes.
It, approaching 30 feet long and, big old club tail. It's got cool armor, all that stuff. So, yeah, Ankylosaurus. Maybe Anodontosaurus because it's got that really spiky tail club, which is cool if you're focused on the club, which you might be if you were in a dog show like competition. You were like, oh yeah, Anodontosaurus. Look at those spiky clubs.
All right. The ornithopod group. I would probably go with Parasaurolophus because it's one of the few dinosaurs where we can even guess what it sounded like thanks to that long head crest. We're thinking it had a low frequency rumbling sound of some sort.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely one of the coolest gulls in nature history. Very, very cool dinosaur. I think if I was going for a specific individual, I'd probably go with Dakota, the mummy.
Oh,
with the
yeah.
like sparkly skin and all that. Just really good preservation. Literally like a mummy. There are some other ornithopod, specifically hadrosaur in general, mummies out there. So one of those mummified ones would be the go-to.
That's a good one.
There's like Leonardo too is another popular one.
Having a nickname's nice too. For the Ceratopsian group, for me it would be Psittacosaurus because there's so many well-preserved specimens. We know it had a belly button because on one of them they found an umbilical scar. We also know a lot about it, like it was counter-shaded, darker on top, lighter on the bottom, to blend in with its forest habitat. It's not known for its horns or frills, though, which I know most people think of with ceratopsians, even though it turns out it has to do with their beaks. So then Styracosaurus might be a close runner-up.
Yes. I mean, really what defines them is their relationship if you're doing it phylogenetically. But yeah, the beak is the real common feature. But I agree with you. Psittacosaurus is definitely the most well-preserved ceratopsian. And that one's actually probably the best preserved dinosaur that we have, period.
Well, there's a very accurate model that's been made of it.
Yes. And I also agree. I think Styracosaurus probably the coolest ceratopsian skull that's around. There are a lot of others that are really cool.
Oh, there's so many. It's hard to choose.
It is.
All right, last but not least, the Pachycephalosaur group. I might go with Stegosaurus here. That genus name means horn roof, and it had this smooth dome on top of its head, and a lot of the side of the skull had these round outgrowths or knobs, many in rows, and then the largest ones made some small horns that had a pretty decorated skull. But that one was hard to choose.
Yeah. I think Pachycephalosaurus itself is pretty cool because it's got the biggest dome on its head. So that's impressive.
I found that one a little bit messy with the synonymization of Dracorex and Stygimoloch.
Yeah, that's true. If I was going to pick one that I think looks the coolest, I might go with Dracorex or Stygimoloch because I like the horns aspect of it more than just the dome. Although some of the specimens of Pachycephalosaurus have more of those spikes sticking out, which looks really cool.
It does.
And I guess I would just pick one that has pretty good spikes preserved. I don't know enough about Pachycephalosaurus to know the exact specimen number of the one with the best spikes. I think the one that they have at the Royal Ontario Museum is pretty good, though.
All right, so if you have more questions or feedback, the best way to send it to us, again, is through bit.ly/dinoquestions. And we will eventually get to them after we take some time out for parental leave. We'll get to our dinosaur of the day in just a moment, but first we're going to take a quick break for our sponsors. And now on to our dinosaur of the day, Albertadromeus. Again, my pick for the best dinosaur meal, although I could also see it being a potentially good pet.
Okay, good.
Maybe I would actually make it a pet and go for the fish to eat.
Or make it a pet and then eat your pet.
No, I wouldn't be able to eat the pet. Anyway, it's getting dark. Albertadromeus was a Thescelosaurid dinosaur that lived in the Late Cretaceous in what is now Alberta, Canada, found in the Oldman Formation. It lived about 77 million years ago. It looked similar to Oryctodromeus, which is a close relative. So it's fitting. It was the answer to one of the listener questions and also was related to Oryctodromeus, and I went down a very deep Oryctodromeus hole for this episode, so... or burrow. Anyway, Albertadromeus was small. It walked on two legs. It had a long tail and a short head. Again, it was estimated to be about 1.6 meters or 5 feet long and weigh about 16 kilograms or 30 pounds. It had a long shin, so it was probably a fast runner. And part of the calf bone is fused to the shin bone. And having the two fused lower leg bones would have helped it run fast as well. Like I said before, it was the smallest known herbivore in its habitat, and maybe it ran away from predators as its main defense. The type and only species is Albertadromeus syntarsus. The fossils were found in 2009, and the holotype includes a couple backbones, a tailbone, parts of the ribs, ossified tendons, the left tibia and fibula, the shin and calf bones, an incomplete right fibula, and parts of the foot. And it's the features in the shin bone that make it unique. No skull has been found. It was described in 2013 by Caleb Brown and others. The genus name Albertadromeus means Alberta runner. The species name syntarsus means together angle and refers to how the calf bone and the shin bone is fused. What's cool is that Albertadromeus shows more diversity in the Oldman Formation. Smaller dinosaurs tend not to be preserved as often as larger ones. The bones are more delicate and easily destroyed, plus they're just kind of harder to find even when they do fossilize. When Albertadromeus was named, Brown and others also named a new subfamily, Oryctodromeus, for Thescelosaurids more closely related to Oryctodromeus than Thescelosaurus. And this group, Oryctodromeus, includes Oryctodromeus.
Mm-hmm.
Thescelosaurids are, just real quick, Neornithischians that lived in the early to late Cretaceous in Asia and North America, and a few of them are known to be burrowers. Albertadromeus lived on an ancient coastal plain, and other dinosaurs that lived around the same time and place include theropods like Daspletosaurus and Troodon, ceratopsids like Albertoceratops and Chasmosaurus, and hadrosaurs like Parasaurolophus and Maiasaura.
I'm just imagining them all running around really quickly, like how you're describing them like rabbits earlier.
Yeah.
And that fits with the main defense being running away.
Yes, it does.
It's definitely true of rabbits.
And our fun fact for this episode, like I said in the beginning, New Zealand isn't the only area where scientists once considered non-avian dinosaurs might have survived past the KPG. So yeah, I got really into that first listener question. Thanks, Richard. So some paleontologists have suggested that dinosaur bones have been found after the extinction event in the Hell Creek Formation, and then there's some paleontologists that have suggested it in the San Juan Basin of New Mexico and Colorado in the US. In the Hell Creek, there were dinosaur teeth found in Montana in a Paleocene deposit of the Hell Creek Formation. They're estimated to be from about 40,000 years after the asteroid hit, because those fossils were found in over 4 feet or over 1 meter above the Cretaceous Paleogene boundary.
That can be significant. Just depends on how fast the sediment is being deposited.
Yes. I will say in both of these examples, the consensus is that no, there's no evidence of dinosaurs past the Cretaceous. In the San Juan Basin, in 1983, there was a 1.3 meter long right hadrosaur femur found in a cliff in the Ojo Alamo sandstone in the San Juan Basin that's from the early Paleocene about 64.8 million years ago. Pollen samples found near that hadrosaur bone, and plus more pollen and spore samples found later, indicate that it was Paleocene in age. And the thinking was, well, maybe this is a dead clade walking. That's a group that survives a mass extinction but doesn't diversify after. Some scientists found, and there were multiple studies on this, that the fossil was unlikely to be a case of reworking. And I'll say there were multiple studies. It seemed like it was a lot of the same authors of these studies.
Okay.
So with reworking, that would be the fossils got moved, but they're saying it's unlikely because that femur was found 15 meters or about 49 feet above the base of the Ojo Alamo sandstone in an area that the bone couldn't have been washed or weathered out from the Cretaceous layer and then redeposited 15 meters above without moving a significant distance. And they said the bone's just too large and heavy. It was 150 kilograms or 330 pounds, so it couldn't have been transported. There's also no scratches or abrasions on the outer surface of the bone, so no evidence of it being transported.
Mystery.
Yes. They also looked at trace elements of that hadrosaur bone and bone samples from the formation. They were bones that were buried in different periods or different years. And they found differences in rare earth elements and uranium in the bones. And they concluded, based on those patterns, that the hadrosaur bone was not a reworked Cretaceous bone. Then, a few years later, 2009, James Fassett, who was part of that team that confirmed the hadrosaur bone was from the Paleocene, confirmed again that the Ojo Alamo sandstone was from the Paleocene, using paleomagnetic and palynologic data. So they're looking at the magnetic field from the past as well as microorganisms.
Or really pollen.
Yes. They also collected more samples of dinosaur fossils at 2 different localities in the area, some from the Paleocene part, some from the Cretaceous part, and again found that the bones had different amounts of uranium and rare earth elements. There was more uranium and less rare earth elements in the Paleocene bones, which they said showed the bones were mineralized in place soon after being buried, and that the Paleocene dinosaur bones therefore were not reworked. They also mentioned looking at an assemblage of 34 skeletal elements from one hadrosaur found in the Paleocene part of the formation. It wasn't articulated, but it's considered to be from the same individual, and they include a lot of the ribs, some backbone, parts of the shoulder. So it was interesting they found more hadrosaur bones.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Now, it's unlikely that in both cases the dinosaur fossils are from the Paleocene. And in both cases, most scientists consider the fossils were reworked. They got washed out of their original locations and then reburied in younger sediments. And I mentioned before, this has happened after other extinction events, which we'll be talking about in our upcoming I Know Paleo saga on mass extinctions in the coming months, so stay tuned if you're a patron. Anyway, for the Hell Creek, there was one study in 1990 that found the dinosaur teeth were thought to be moved there because it's a channel fill. The sediments were deposited by water flowing through a channel. And they could only tell the teeth were reworked after detailed analysis of the sediments and microfossils. And a follow-up in 1995 talked about the Bug Creek problem, which refers to questions on the Cretaceous mammals and dinosaurs found in Paleocene layers in the Hell Creek. They analyzed more pollen and microfossils, as well as the geology of the rocks, and found that these dinosaur and mammal fossils were reworked. They were only found in channel fills.
Oh, okay. But that's not the San Juan Basin.
For the San Juan Basin, Paul Wren and Mark Goodwin in 2012 commented that because it was fossils and not bones that were sampled, knowing the uranium and rare earth element amounts was conjectural. They said uranium often absorbs in dinosaur bones buried in the local water, and many elements get drawn in from surrounding sediments during fossilization, and that could have happened at any time.
That's what I was wondering too, because it's been buried 60 plus million years in the Paleocene, even if that was when it was alive. But if it got shifted over a couple million years and then reburied, it still had all that time to get that uranium absorbed.
Yes, so they argued that at best we can only know the minimum age of the fossil, but we don't know how close that minimum age of the fossil is to when the dinosaur died. They also argued that the samples analyzed were fossil bone fragments, not articulated skeletons, so they're suspected of being reworked. And they said the same thing happened with the isolated teeth in the Hell Creek Formation that was thought to be buried after the extinction event. Interesting.
That's a good point, because saying, well, there isn't any wear on them when it's a broken fragment, it's like, that's pretty worn. It may not be worn in like an abraded sense, but it's still heavily damaged compared to the original.
I think for these hypotheses, there was a lot of scrutiny on them because they're pretty big claims.
Yes. Yeah, that's the extraordinary claims that require extraordinary evidence.
But it is an interesting thought.
It really wouldn't be surprising if there was some place on Earth where non-avian dinosaurs survived for some hundreds of thousands or maybe even millions of years after the extinction event, because we see something like the coelacanth, right? Where we thought it was extinct and it's happened to be around for tens of millions of years, just in a very specific niche ecosystem where it fit in better than the rest of the world.
Yes.
But whether or not that place can be found with dinosaurs and where things fossilized is a different question. And also, that end Cretaceous extinction event was really, really dramatic.
Yes.
And it also, the most simple explanation at this point is that they just all got wiped out.
Well, it seems like it would be really hard to survive in the Hell Creek because you're in the northern hemisphere.
For sure.
And that was a lot tougher to be in the northern hemisphere than the southern hemisphere, since the asteroid hit in the northern part.
And both of these claims are pretty close to the impact site. Now, if we're talking about New Zealand, like you were talking about earlier, Antarctica, maybe there's a better argument there. But if you're talking about North America or even South America, that's just so close. We know that that area just got decimated.
Right. Well, a lot of the papers that I found came out before people started talking about the Tanis site.
Makes sense. Yeah, because that's up in Montana, I think, somewhere in northern North America near Hell Creek, with just all sorts of extreme evidence of massive tsunami and crazy damage.
Yes. But I think what's now New Zealand fared a little bit better because the southern hemisphere just wasn't hit as hard.
Yeah. We'll have to see. Maybe somebody will find some New Zealand Paleogene non-avian dinosaur fossils at some point. That'd be super cool.
That would be cool. Well, that wraps up this episode of I Know Dino. Thank you for listening. Stay tuned. Next week, we will have some new dinosaurs. So far, there's a sauropod and an antiornithine. We'll see if anything else comes up. And if you want to join our growing community, hang out with fellow Dino-know-it-alls and ask questions and get all the perks like the I Know Paleo episodes, then consider joining patreon.com/iknowdino. Thanks again, and until next time.